I thought HOA fines were the worst they could throw at me, until 2 fake cops showed up at my door claiming I was under arrest. Their badges? Cheap knockoffs. Their authority? Non-existent. And the mastermind behind it all? My power-hungry HOA president, Karen. But what she didn't know was that I was already one step ahead, and her entire scheme was about to explode in her face. The first sign that my new neighborhood was a little off was when my porch light mysteriously went out. Not just burned out. Dead. Like no power at all. I flicked the switch a few times, puzzled. The rest of my house was fine. TV, kitchen lights, even the Wi-Fi router were still running strong. But the porch light? Completely lifeless. Maybe it's just a bad breaker, I muttered to myself, heading to the electrical panel in my garage. A few flips later, nothing had changed. That's when I noticed something even weirder. My neighbor across the street, Mr. Thompson, was outside, staring up at his own darkened porch light with a similar look of confusion. Then I saw Mrs. Jensen 2 doors down. Same issue. Porch lights out, everything else normal. Coincidence? Maybe. But I've never been good at believing in those. I was about to head over and ask when a voice interrupted me. You should really read the HOA guidelines. I turned to see her. Karen, if you've ever had an HOA president who took their job too seriously, you already know her. If not, imagine a woman in her late 50s with a haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," a clipboard permanently attached to her side, and an aura of self-importance so thick you could suffocate in it. She was standing at the edge of my driveway watching me like a hawk. HOA guidelines? I repeated, arching an eyebrow. You mean there's a rule against porch lights? Karen gave me the kind of smile people use right before delivering bad news. Not against them. But they have to be HOA approved. Proper wattage. Soft white. No LED blues or, heaven forbid, colored bulbs. You did submit a request before installing yours, right? I glanced up at my porch. It was the exact same warm white bulb I'd had since moving in 2 months ago. It came with the house. Karen's smile didn't waver. Then it's probably not up to code. We had a vote last week to regulate external lighting. I blinked. A vote? About porch lights. Oh yes, she said, nodding. We wouldn't want the neighborhood to look disorganized. Something about the way she said it made me suspicious. So, did the HOA turn off my porch light? Karen gasped in mock offense. Of course not. The HOA doesn't control electricity. But if we notice a light that's non-compliant, we simply notify the homeowner's power company. I narrowed my eyes. You called the power company on me? We notified them about all the homes that were out of compliance, she corrected, gesturing toward the other darkened houses. It's standard procedure. I looked back at the street at my equally confused neighbors. She'd cut power to multiple homes over a porch light rule. That's when I knew. Karen wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was on a power trip. Literally. I could have argued, but I knew her type. Karen was the kind of person who got high on her tiny sliver of authority, wielding HOA rules like they were laws of the land. Logic wouldn't work on her. So instead I smiled. Got it. I'll, look into that. Her expression faltered for a split second, like she'd expected a bigger fight. But then she straightened her clipboard and nodded. Glad to hear it. I'll be following up soon. With that, she strutted off, probably to ruin someone else's day. Now, at this point, most people would probably just replace the bulb with an HOA-approved version and move on. But me? I had questions. How did the HOA convince the power company to cut power to specific fixtures? Why was Karen so invested in minor infractions? What was stopping her from escalating things even further? And most importantly, how far was she willing to go to enforce her ridiculous rules? I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out the hard way. A little digging goes a long way. The next morning I started my research. I called the power company first. After an eternity of holding, I finally got a rep. Yeah, we've had a few of those requests lately, the guy on the phone admitted when I asked about the HOA porch light situation. They submitted a formal request citing community safety concerns. I frowned. But how do they even have the authority to do that? Well, technically they don't. But they made it sound urgent. Claimed it was a fire hazard. Fire hazard. For a porch light. I thanked the rep and hung up, now more annoyed than before. The HOA had lied to get their way. But the real kicker came when I spoke to Mr. Thompson across the street. "Oh, you're new here," he chuckled when I told him about my power woes. "You haven't seen anything yet." "What do you mean?" "She does this every year," he said. "Starts with small things. Light fixtures, mailbox colors, garden decorations. She waits for someone to push back, then she escalates." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Escalates how?" Mr. Thompson gave me a knowing look. "Last year, a guy 2 blocks over refused to trim his hedges exactly how she wanted. A week later, the city received a complaint about unpermitted modifications to his driveway. And they made him tear the whole thing up." I stared at him. "You're joking." "Wish I was." He sighed. "Look, if you cross Karen, expect trouble. Best advice. Just replace the bulb and stay under the radar." Maybe most people would have taken his advice. But me? I'm not most people. If Karen wanted a power struggle, she just found her opponent. And she had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA. Subject * urgent compliance notice. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that your exterior lighting does not meet HOA standards. Please rectify this immediately with an approved fixture or face further penalties. Additionally, continued non-compliance may result in additional enforcement actions. Sincerely, Karen P. HOA President." I scoffed. Enforcement actions? What did she think she was running, a military base? I grabbed my coffee and stepped onto the porch, glancing across the street. Mr. Thompson was already outside, shaking his head at his still dark porch light. "She got you too?" I called. "Same email, same threats," he said. "You gonna cave?" I smirked. "Not a chance." What Karen didn't know was that I'd spent a good portion of the night researching HOA laws. As it turned out, while an HOA could make recommendations about external aesthetics, they didn't have the legal right to tamper with private electrical fixtures, especially without consent. That meant one thing: Karen had broken the law. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The power company had confirmed they didn't have a procedure for selectively disabling specific light fixtures. Yet somehow Karen had managed it. Which meant either 1. She was lying about the power company's involvement. 2. She had a way to cut power that no one knew about. Either way, I intended to find out. I spent the afternoon inspecting my electrical panel. Everything looked normal. No tripped breakers, no damaged wiring. So if the power to my porch light had been cut, where was the disconnect? That's when I had a ridiculous idea. I grabbed my ladder and climbed up to the light fixture itself. Unscrewing the casing, I expected to find a simple wiring issue. Instead, I found something way more alarming. A small black device was attached to the wiring. I squinted. It looked like some kind of remote-controlled switch. Something that could turn my light on and off remotely without touching the main power. I yanked it off, climbed down, and inspected it closely. It had no official branding, just a generic plastic casing with a tiny antenna. Now I was certain. Karen wasn't just reporting homes to the power company, she was directly interfering with people's property. The question was, how? I didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, I left my porch light off to avoid suspicion and took a slow walk around the neighborhood. If Karen had messed with my home, she'd likely done it to others too. Sure enough, I found the same device attached to Mr. Thompson's porch light. And Mrs. Jensen's. And at least 4 other homes. Karen had installed remote kill switches on half the block. I was halfway through disconnecting another one when a voice rang out behind me. "You know, that's considered vandalism." I turned. Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. I held up the device. "Really? Because it looks more like illegal property tampering to me." Karen didn't flinch. "Those are part of our new HOA Smart Energy Initiative." I let out a laugh. "Smart Energy Initiative? You're cutting power to people's homes with black market tech." She sighed like I was an unruly child. Homeowners were leaving their lights on too late. It was causing an aesthetic disruption to the neighborhood. I stared at her. "You're literally hijacking people's electricity." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "It's a temporary measure until everyone installs approved fixtures." I shook my head. "You do realize this is illegal, right?" "Oh please," she scoffed. "The HOA has the right to enforce compliance." "No, you don't. You can fine people, sure. But cutting off their power? That's criminal trespass." Karen's expression flickered, but only for a second. Then report it if you feel so strongly. I narrowed my eyes. She was daring me. Karen wasn't stupid. She knew I'd have to go through a long bureaucratic process to report her. And in the meantime she'd continue her little power trip. Fine. He wanted a game I'd play. That night I reinstalled my porch light. Not just any light. A motion-activated floodlight bright enough to rival a stadium. The second Karen or any of her HOA minions came snooping, they'd get blasted with 5,000 lumens of pure regret. Sure enough, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from my outdoor camera. I pulled up the feed and there she was. Karen. Caught in the act. She crept up my driveway, clipboard in hand, reaching up toward my light fixture. Then, boom. The floodlight exploded to life. Karen yelped and stumbled backward, momentarily blinded. She dropped her clipboard, papers flying everywhere. I stepped onto the porch, sipping my coffee like I'd been expecting her. Evening, Karen. She scrambled to collect her papers. This is unacceptable. I grinned. I know. Just imagine if someone was tampering with your property in the middle of the night. That'd be crazy, right? She huffed, adjusting her hair. You'll regret this. Doubt it. I leaned against the railing. By the way, I already forwarded your little smart energy initiative to my lawyer. Oh, and the power company. And the police. Karen's face paled. You wouldn't. I would. She turned on her heel and stormed off, but I could tell, for the first time she was rattled, But the fight wasn't over. Because the next morning, a new email landed in my inbox. Subject notice of serious HOA violations. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you are engaging in hostile activities against HOA leadership. This is a direct violation of community standards. Immediate compliance is required, or further action will be taken. Sincerely, Karen P. President. I exhaled. So this was how she wanted to play it. I had no idea what further action meant. But I was about to find out. And Karen? She was about to realize she'd messed with the wrong homeowner. The next morning I awoke to the sound of heavy knocking on my front door. Not just a polite tap, the kind of knocking that makes you think someone is here to collect a debt or worse. I grabbed my phone, checked the doorbell camera and felt my stomach drop. Two men stood on my porch, both wearing police uniforms. But something was off. Their badges looked cheap, their belts were missing key gear. No radios, no handcuffs, nothing that screamed official business. Instead, they had the kind of uniforms you'd find in a Halloween costume aisle. I wasn't buying it. I opened the door but didn't step outside. Can I help you? The taller of the two, who had an unfortunate mustache that looked like it had been drawn on with a Sharpie, cleared his throat. We're here on behalf of the HOA, sir. I blinked. The HOA has police officers now? The second guy, who looked barely old enough to buy a beer, shuffled uncomfortably. You've been reported for multiple infractions. We have orders to take you into custody. I nearly laughed. You have orders? From who exactly? Mustache man squared his shoulders. From the HOA president. That was it. Actually laughed. Karen sent you? The two men exchanged glances. Clearly they weren't expecting this reaction. Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll be forced to escalate the situation, Mustache warned. Oh, please do, I said, pulling out my phone. Why don't you go ahead and call this in? Let's see how real cops feel about two random guys impersonating officers. The younger one took a nervous step back, but Mustache held his ground. Look, buddy, just make it easy on yourself. Step outside, we'll sort this out. I've got a better idea, I said, snapping a photo of them. Why don't you both smile for the real cops? That did it. The younger guy took off running immediately, leaving Mustache standing there alone. He hesitated for a second before muttering, "This isn't over," and bolting down the driveway. I stood there watching them sprint away like two kids caught teeing a house. Unbelievable. Karen had actually hired fake cops to intimidate me. I closed the door and called my retired cop neighbor, Mr. Thompson. He picked up on the second ring. "Morning, Alex," he said. "What's up?" "You're not gonna believe this," I said. "Karen just sent two guys to my house pretending to be cops." There was a brief silence. Then he chuckled. "You serious?" Dead serious. They had uniforms and everything. Tell me you got pictures. Better. My doorbell camera recorded the whole thing. Thompson let out a whistle. Karen's really lost it this time. That's felony level stupid. You think we should report it? I asked. He didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. Impersonating an officer is a major crime. And if Karen's behind it, she's in deep. I grinned. Guess I'm making a call to the real cops then. After hanging up, I dialed the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. They took it very seriously, especially when I mentioned I had footage. Stay put, the officer on the phone told me. We're sending someone over. Good. Because I had a feeling Karen wasn't done yet. About an hour later, a real squad car pulled up in front of my house. A uniformed officer stepped out and I greeted him on the porch. Officer Daniels. He introduced himself. You reported 2 individuals impersonating law enforcement? I nodded. Yeah. My camera caught everything. I played the footage for him and his expression darkened. This is bad, he muttered. You said the HOA president sent them? Yep. Karen. He sighed. We've had complaints about her before, but this is next level. I leaned against the railing. So what happens now? Well, for starters, we'll be tracking down these 2 clowns, he said. And if we can prove Karen was behind it. He let out a low whistle. She's looking at serious charges. That was music to my ears. I handed over the footage and the officer assured me they'd follow up soon. But I already knew Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. Sure enough, the next day a new threat arrived. I stepped outside to grab my mail and found a bright red notice taped to my front door. Final warning. Immediate compliance required. It was an eviction notice. From the HOA. I laughed out loud. This woman was actually trying to evict me from my own house. I scanned the notice. It claimed I was in flagrant violation of HOA regulations and that my property was subject to seizure. Nice try, Karen. I walked straight over to her house, knocked on the door and waited. A moment later she appeared, looking smug as ever. Ah, Mr. Alex, she said sweetly. Come to apologize? I held up the notice. Are you out of your mind? Karen placed a hand over her chest in mock innocence. I'm simply following procedure. You've failed to comply with multiple HOA mandates, and under our bylaws, we're within our rights to reclaim non-compliant properties. I burst out laughing. Karen, this isn't a rental. You can't evict me from my own house. She just smiled. That's not what the bylaws say. I shook my head. You're bluffing. And by the way, the real cops are investigating you. That wiped the smirk off her face. Excuse me. You heard me, I said. Impersonating law enforcement is a crime. And since you sent those fake cops to my house, you're about to have bigger problems than an LED porch light. Her eyes flickered with panic before she recovered. I have no idea what you're talking about. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Karen, it's over. The police have footage, they're tracking those guys down, and when they do, your name is coming up. For the first time since I'd moved in, Karen looked genuinely afraid. She inhaled sharply, gripping the doorframe. You'll regret this. Not as much as you will, I said. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, silent. But something told me this wasn't over yet. There's people like Karen. They don't go down without a fight. The next morning, I woke up half expecting Karen to have escalated her nonsense. But even I wasn't prepared for what happened next. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Thompson. Thompson ***, check your driveway. You're gonna love this. ***. Confused, I pulled back my curtains and nearly choked on my coffee. A boot. A big yellow city-grade wheel clamp had been locked onto my front tire. I stomped outside, already fuming. A laminated sign was taped to my windshield. Vehicle immobilized for HOA violations. This is getting ridiculous, I muttered, crouching down to inspect the boot. It wasn't from the city. No official markings, no citation number. It looked like something Karen had bought online. A slow clap broke the morning silence. I turned. Karen stood at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, smug as ever. Failure to comply with HOA policies has consequences, she said. And I did warn you. I stood up, dusting off my hands. You really woke up this morning and thought, ***, you know what? Let's commit another crime. ***. Her smirk twitched. It's not a crime. It's an enforcement action. I let out a laugh. Karen, you do realize HOAs can't legally boot cars, right? Only the city can do that. And last time I checked, you don't work for the city. She huffed. It's in the bylaws. It's not in the bylaws, I shot back. And if it was, it'd be illegal. Her face turned red, but before she could argue, Mr. Thompson strolled over, holding his phone. Hope you don't mind, but I already called the police, he said casually. Karen's face twisted in panic. You what? Oh, don't worry, I said. I'm sure they'll love hearing about how you're impersonating law enforcement, illegally booting cars, and trying to evict people from their own homes. For the first time, Karen looked genuinely nervous. You can't prove anything. Thompson waved his phone. We have everything on camera. Including your fake cops running away like kids caught sneaking out past curfew. Karen took a step back. You don't understand. I was just trying to maintain order. You think I like doing this? Someone has to enforce the rules. I narrowed my eyes. No, Karen, someone has to follow the law, and it sure as hell isn't you. A few minutes later, the real cops showed up. Officer Daniels, the same guy who had taken my statement the day before, stepped out of his squad car and immediately sighed when he saw the boot. Well, he said, hands on his hips. She just keeps digging herself deeper, huh? Karen tried to launch into some nonsense about HOA authority and community safety, but Daniels wasn't having it. Ma'am, he interrupted, you are not law enforcement. You have zero authority to detain a vehicle, shut off people's electricity, or, he glanced at me, hire fake officers to make arrests. Karen's face paled. I didn't. Daniels held up his hand. Save it. We already found your 2 officers. They confessed. My eyebrows shot up. That was fast. And guess what? Daniels continued. They said you paid them. Gave them instructions. Even wrote them a script. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. So here's what's going to happen, Daniels said, pulling out his notepad. You're being charged with conspiracy, harassment, and impersonating law enforcement. Karen took a shaky step back. No, wait. This is a misunderstanding. Daniels raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I don't think hiring fake police officers is something people misunderstand. I crossed my arms. I dunno, officer, maybe she's got a smart energy initiative excuse for this one too. Thompson chuckled. Karen looked around desperately as if hoping someone would defend her. But the other neighbors had started gathering, murmuring amongst themselves. No one spoke up for her. Daniels pulled out his cuffs. Turn around, ma'am. Karen's composure shattered. Wait, no. This isn't fair. You can't. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. The entire neighborhood fell silent. I don't know if you've ever seen an HOA president get arrested on their own front lawn, but let me tell you, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. As they led her to the squad car, she shrieked, You'll regret this. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood in order. The door slammed shut. I turned to Thompson. Think she'll still try to find me from jail? He chuckled. Wouldn't put it past her. A few days later, the HOA held an emergency vote. Karen, gone. Turns out, once word got out that she'd been running her own personal dictatorship, including cutting people's power and staging fake arrests. Even her loyal followers turned on her. A new HOA board was elected, one that actually cared about, not breaking the law. As for me, I got a personal apology from the board. And best of all, I reinstalled my brightest, most obnoxious porch light. Just as a little tribute to Karen's reign of terror. And every time I flicked it on, I smiled. Biz Karen? She was never coming back. What would you have done if Karen tried to cut off your power or boot your car? Would you have fought back or played it safe? Have you ever dealt with an overzealous HOA or a power-hungry neighbor? What's the craziest HOA rule you've heard of? At what point do you think Karen truly lost control of the situation? Was it the fake cops, the power tampering, or the illegal car booting? Do you think the protagonist handled the situation the right way, or should they have escalated it differently? If you were on the HOA board, what changes would you implement to prevent another Karen from taking over?